Thank you, Bart, Chris. Appreciate the band playing with them. You know, I love it when instead of just flipping on a CD, Chris uses the band as our choir sings. I really enjoy hearing them. Today we're going to continue our walk with Jesus to the cross, and we're going to talk about the betrayal of Jesus. I've got the next picture. I was going to tell a story about William Tyndall, but I'm going to change that. So we're not going to tell this story. Because there was another, something that happened in our town about just over a week ago. Some teenage boys, I'm assuming they were all boys, did what teenage boys do sometimes when their brains turn off, which happens too often, right? Teenage boys kind of tend to turn their brains off at times. But some teenage boys defaced the walking bridge going over 35 here in town. And on Facebook, people were just screaming and calling these poor kids, didn't know who they were, all kinds of names. Well, then the boys that did it turned themselves in, which, you know what? We should be happy for those boys. You should be proud of them. Now, yes, the cops probably knew who they were. They were probably going to get arrested anyway. But they turned themselves in. And what really struck me was the dad of one of those boys went on Facebook and said, my son was one of the boys that did this. And what really struck me was this dad poured his heart out on Facebook, a place where, on a part of Facebook where people just attack viciously so many times. And he said, my son was one of them. I love it because he said, whatever the judge gives him, don't worry, he's going to do more than that. And I thought, okay, Dad, good job. But you know, you can tell the hurt that this dad had. He's saying, I thought I was a great parent. I thought I'd done everything right, and then my son goes out and does this, and he talked about just the hurt that he experienced as a parent, knowing what his son had done. And in a sense, talking about it was the sense of almost betrayal that he felt. And he explained, my son realized, and his son actually got on later on in the thread. His son comes on and using his dad's account, says, this is who I am. I was one of them that did it. I knew as we were doing it that this was dumb and we shouldn't be doing this. So I don't even know why I did it. You know, as a parent, we know that sense of hurt when our kids do dumb things. And that sense of just that anger, but that love that you have for your kids, that even when they're doing dumb things, and even when you want to just wring their neck, you still love them unconditionally, right? It's part of the pain of being a parent. Well, today we're going to read a story where I think Jesus experiences that pain. That pain of being betrayed by his own people. And then we're going to see how he responds to that betrayal. If you've got a Bible, turn to Luke chapter 22. We're going to pick up in verse 47. Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's got all of his disciples except for Judas, who we're going to come back into the story here in just a second. They have been praying, and remember we talked about last week, they prayed, and Jesus said, Father, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. And we talked about that prayer. We talked about when we know something is coming, a challenge, a trial, a temptation, that we need to learn to be able to pray and to pray honestly and pray with integrity and to keep on praying until we can get to that point where we say, God, not my will, but yours be done. And so Jesus has finished that. He has solidified himself. His mind is made up. man, his spirit is ready for what's about to happen. And we pick up in verse 47. While he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus asked him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, Lord, should we strike with our swords? And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus answered, no more of this. And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns. We're going to talk about dealing with betrayal, handling betrayal. As we start this story in verses 47 through 50, Jesus is betrayed by a kiss and by friends. You know, Jesus has already told his disciples, already warned his disciples that this is going to happen. He said, one of you will betray me. Earlier that night, he's already warned them. He's prepared them. And he's prepared them for 3 years during the time that he was with them that this was going to happen. And now that time has come. And here Judas is leading a mob. And Judas walks up and is going to betray him with a kiss. The betrayal was done by means of a kiss. And you know, we think about that. And for us in a modern day America, that seems weird. But we have to understand that to kiss on the cheek was a sign of respect for one's teacher. It was very common for a student, who would often be called a disciple, to kiss their leader, their teacher, as a sign of respect of their authority, of respect of them as a person, to show their kinship, their love to the person that they're kissing. And so that is what Judas Iscariot comes up and he's going to kiss Jesus, saying, supposedly, I love you, I respect you. The hypocrisy of that kiss is monumental. Can you imagine the hurt that Jesus must have experienced when here this guy who he has given 3 years of his life to teach him, to train him, to guide him, to build him up. And now all of a sudden this guy is coming out and he is going to betray him with a kiss. And the stab in the heart that Jesus must have felt of the betrayal. In some ways, though, it gets worse. Because what happens next is his disciples. One of his disciples, the other Gospels name him as Peter. Peter takes his sword that he has carried, because Jesus said, hey, if you have a sword, bring a sword. He takes his sword and he strikes out and he cuts off the ear of one of the men that have come in this mob. Extra biblical traditions tell us that this man's name was Malchus, that he was a servant of the high priest. He was part of the group that had come out there to arrest. And all of the disciples, first they asked, Jesus, should we go now? Should we fight now? And they don't even wait for Jesus to say no. One of them just immediately grabs his sword and strikes out. And he cuts off the priest, or the ear of the high priest. To me, I think this is another betrayal of Jesus. I say it's a betrayal because what has Jesus taught his disciples for 3 years? Love your neighbor as yourself. When someone strikes you, they hit you on one cheek, what do? You turn the other cheek. Jesus has taught them a system of nonviolence, a system of love, of respect. And now here at the first hint of trouble, Peter lashes out and cuts off the ear of the high priest. And I think Jesus, when he saw it, his heart broke again. Because he immediately says, stop. No more. Jesus was betrayed not just by the one that came to kiss him and to hand him over to the mob, to the high priest. But he was also betrayed by his disciples who were still with him. Why do I say that? Because they betrayed the principles that Jesus stood for. They betrayed the principles that he had taught them for 3 years. And as much as that first stab in the heart from Judas must have hurt, I think this second one, to see his disciples, the guys who were still with him, to see them betray his principles, must have hurt. You live long enough in this world, you will be betrayed by people that you think love you. You will be betrayed by people that you think care for you. You will experience that if you have not already. If you haven't already, I would say you probably just haven't lived long enough. It will happen. I can think back to my life, and I can think back at times that the people that I had invested time in. I will tell you, I had one family in our church. They came to our church really messed up. I mean, really messed up. They came from a crazy background. Drugs and alcohol and all kinds of stuff. Came to our church, and they started cleaning their life up. And as they were cleaning their life up, they had to get rid of garbage. And they were just dumping emotional garbage all over the place at the church. And many, many times I spent a lot of hours with this family just talking with them and sitting with them and listening to the challenges that they had in their life, listening to their stories as they kind of poured their garbage out, because I knew that if they could get the garbage out of their life, then they could refill that with Christ. And so I spent a lot of time with them, discipled them, spent Bible study time with them, talking with them about who Christ is, about what Christ wants to do in their life, how He wants to change their life. And they go through this process of a couple of years, and they get to the point where they are actually really about to become very useful to the church. I know that doesn't sound very good for me to say that, but it's the truth, okay? We had invested a lot of hours in them. And now they were at a place where we were about to see the return on that investment. And I want to tell you, that is not why we minister to people, but it sure does feel good when you get to see the return on your investment, when you get to see somebody that you have poured your life into, and you've discipled them, and you've grown them, and you've seen them start to really walk in Christ, and they're now ready to start serving in church and taking on responsibilities, and you think, man, this is going to be great. And then they come and they say, well, we just feel like God is calling us to another church. Man, I felt like the knife was shoved right in the back. And I wanted to jump up in their face and say, what? All the hours that we invested in you weren't enough? We didn't help you enough? And then I think back to what Jesus experienced. And I said, I need to respond better. So how did Jesus respond? Because that's the question that we have to ask ourselves. When we are betrayed, when somebody turns their back on you, when somebody harms you, somebody that you've invested time and experience and love in, when they turn their back on you, how do we respond? Well, I think Jesus shows us 3 ways to respond. The first, He responds with healing. After Peter slices off the ear of Malchus, Jesus restores it. I love how Luke says it. Luke just says He touched him and He restored the ear. I've often wondered, did Jesus bend over and pick up the ear and stick it back on? Did He make a new ear? I don't know. I wish Luke would have told us. Because there is probably some old cathedral in Europe that has an old ear as one of their holy relics. Probably, yeah. Y'all laugh, but that's probably the truth. We have no idea. But Jesus responds with healing. Here are these people. This guy has come to arrest him. He is taking him back to the high priest. Jesus knows what's going to happen. I mean, Jesus knows he's about to be abused in ways that we cannot even imagine. And he is going to be crucified. Jesus has every reason to look at Malchus and go, serves you right. Shouldn't have come with him. But he doesn't. He heals. Folks, when somebody betrays us, when somebody harms us, instead of lashing out, we need to be like Jesus and respond with healing. Because those who betray us often do so out of emotional pain that overwhelms their loyalty to you and to God. This family, this couple that I talked about, what finally got them, and I think really what made them decide they had to leave the church, was they started looking around and they started recognizing that the people in this church knew all of their garbage. The people in this church knew all of their history, and they looked and they said that that's not us anymore. And instead of dealing with the fact that we knew their history, they decided it'd be easier to go somewhere else. The reality is, none of us cared. We didn't look at them. We didn't think about their history. What we thought about of them was where they were. We thought about what God had done in their life, how God had changed them. And man, we were so excited. We didn't care what they had done before. But they couldn't get over the fact that everybody in this church knew all of the things that they had done in years past. And that emotional pain overwhelmed that loyalty to us. And sometimes that's what happens. Sometimes people betray you, not because of you, but because of the own pain in their life that they have not been able to fully let go of. Jesus is dealing with that. But we need to respond as Jesus did, by working for healing instead of retribution. Don't lash out. Heal. You may say, Grant, I can't restore somebody's ear. Well, neither can I. But I'll tell you what we can do. We can help to heal that emotional pain. And we can help people to grow out of the abuse in their life. We can help people to grow out of those things that have held them back. And when people betray us, respond with healing. Verses 52 and 53, secondly, Jesus responds with integrity. In these verses, we hear Jesus speak to the crowd of the soldiers and servants. He tells them, what are you doing? Why are you coming out here to arrest me with all of these clubs and swords and spears? Every day I've been in the temple teaching. You could have just picked me up right there. All you had to do was walk up and take it. Well, why have you come out like this? He's being honest with them. The NIV most correctly translates the thought, calls Jesus a revolutionary. It says, am I a revolutionary? Some of your translations may say thief, robber. The best translation really is a revolutionary. That's what they're calling Jesus. When they take Jesus to Pilate, that's what they're going to call him. They don't call him a thief. They call him a revolutionary. And Jesus says to him, he's honest. He says, is that what I am to you? And you may look at that and go, wait, these words sound kind of harsh. Because at first glance they do. They sound challenging. They sound harsh. Jesus could have said a whole lot more. Jesus could have told them a lot more things. He could have called them a lot of other names. But he doesn't. He's honest with them. Folks, we have to deal with healing. We have to respond with healing. But we also need to respond with integrity, with honesty. You got to be honest and deal in facts. When somebody harms you, don't just gloss it over and say, oh, it's no problem. Jesus doesn't do it. Jesus doesn't gloss over the faults of the disciples. We'll see later in Luke and other, Jesus deals with the problems, but he does it with kindness. Paul in Ephesians tells us to speak the truth in love. Sometimes we like to speak the truth, but we don't really like to put the last part in there. Speak the truth in love. I know a guy one time that, man, he was blunt to the point of rudeness. And people would say something to him, he'd say, I'm just following what Paul says. Speak the truth. And I had to pull him aside one time and go, have you read the rest of that verse? What do you mean? I said, you read the rest of it? Paul doesn't just say, speak the truth. He says, speak the truth in love. When we are dealing with those who have betrayed us, we have got to speak the truth. We need to be honest. We need to be full of integrity. But we do it as the third point. We do it with kindness. You've got to respond with kindness. Here is Jesus, a man who can command legions, armies of angels. You know, the high priest sent out a mob, soldiers and temple guards. Let's just say he sent 100. I don't know, it doesn't tell us how many. But let's say that they sent 100 people out there. All Jesus has to do is say, hey, angels, it's time. And he could send thousands, tens of thousands. But he doesn't. Number one, he doesn't because it's not in God's plan. He's following the plan that God has laid out. But he also doesn't do it because he's responding with kindness. He's responding the way God wants him to respond. He could have called death down. And if you go back in 2 Kings, there's a story in 2 Kings of Elisha. And Elisha is sitting up on a hill, and he's made the king mad. And so the king sends out this army, a squadron of soldiers. They come up, and they come to the bottom of the hill. And the first squadron, the commander yells up at Elisha. He says, Elisha, get down here. I got to take you to the king. And Elisha responds back. Basically, he says, yeah, if I really am a man of God, God send lightning and kill him. That's what happens. First group is wiped out. The second group gets wiped out. The third group finally comes in, and this guy's learned something because he's realized what's happened to the other two. And he comes in and he says, please don't kill us. And when he says that, Elisha says, okay, I'll go with you now. Elisha called down death. Jesus doesn't. I'm not going to say that Elisha was wrong. But Jesus responds in a way that God has directed him to. And Jesus gives himself. He peacefully accepts the situation. Folks, that's responding with kindness. Jesus was meek, not weak. Remember that. He was meek, not weak. Meek is power held under control. Jesus could have responded with death, but he didn't. He responded with kindness, with honesty, with integrity. Folks, that's how we need to respond. We need to respond when people betray us with healing, with kindness, with love. People will betray you. That is a simple fact. It will happen. If it has not happened yet, consider yourself lucky and know that it will happen. The question is, what do you do when people betray you? How do you respond? My challenge is that you would respond as Jesus did, with honesty, integrity, but with healing and kindness. Do it the Jesus way. Let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, Lord, we know that in this world we'll experience challenges and trials. That there will be times that we are betrayed. There will be times that people treat us in ways that we would never want to be treated. And Father, I pray that when that happens, that we would respond with love, with generosity, with kindness, we would respond with healing. And Father, I pray right now if there are some in this congregation that have been on the receiving end of betrayal, Father, I pray that you would challenge them right now as to how they have responded. Father, that if they have responded not as you would have us, but they would have responded as the world would. And Lord, I pray that you would challenge us, that you'd convict us, that you would draw us to yourself, to behave and to respond as you would, so that we might show the world who you really are. Pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Just a minute, we're going to have